HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents We Don't Know Ourselves, a personal history of modern Ireland, by Fintan O'Toole, read by Aidan Kelly.
To Kieran, Valerie and Patrick, and in memory of Mary and Colm. Prelude. The loneliest boy in the world. At Christmas 1948, 10 years before my own birth, 2 wise men came bearing gifts for a child born in a humble cabin. Yet this child was seen as a harbinger, not of the birth of a new world, but of the death of an old one. He was called Garrod O'Cahan, and he was the only child left on the Blasket Islands, off the coast of County Kerry. The Blaskets were famous as a remnant of an old Gaelic world, a vestige of an ancient way of life. The community had a remarkable late flourishing of literary self-expression in the autobiographical books of Tomás Ó Críomhthán, Peg Sayers, Murish O'Sullivan, and other islanders. For Irish nationalists, it was a microcosm of the distinctive culture they had promised to revive, hardy, simple, pious, but rich in memories and dense with stories and songs in the Irish language. Now, though, it was a microcosm of something else, the disappearance of the Irish world. The lifeblood of the islands was draining away westward as the people emigrated, in particular to Springfield, Massachusetts, where they found work in the blast furnaces and cloth mills. The names of places spoken of by those who went and returned were now American addresses: Van Horn Park and Chicopee, Indian Orchard and Watershops Pond. This seemed to be not just their specific fate, but that of Ireland as a whole. The writer Honor Tracy, visiting the Great Blasket round this time, called its ruined cottages miniatures of the ruins lying about all over Ireland. The wise men who came with gifts for Garrod O'Cahan were a reporter, Liam Robinson, and a photographer from the Irish Press, the newspaper owned by the man who had dominated Irish politics for 30 years, Eamon de Valera, who was Taoiseach, Prime Minister, for most of the 1930s, 1940s and 1950s. Robinson framed his story as the swan song, not just of an offshore village, but of an epoch spanning millennia, making little Garrod the heir to a civilization and island home that is dying. He will be remembered as a last link with a hidden Ireland. Later, as the child acquired an almost mythic status, the Irish press would call him the last child on a dying island that is the last outpost of the Celtic Empire. Garrod was the last of the Mohicans. On that first pre-Christmas trip, the reporter laid at his feet toys, booties and things on wheels, and recorded the sounds, in his infant's Irish, that expressed his wonderment. Robinson's story was taken up by international newspapers, often under the headline, "The Loneliest Boy in the World." Readers moved by his plight sent gifts for Garrod. As he told Bob Quinn in 1993, "I got parcels from Australia and from New Zealand and from America." In 1949, he got trains, cars, trucks, every sort of book, clothes and shoes. There was no stop to them. In the middle of that year, my name was on everyone's lips as if I were a film star. Patrick Fitzgerald, a rancher in Minnesota who read the story in a local paper, wrote to his parents. He told them he had lost 2 children in their tender years, and that he and his wife would like to adopt Garrod, who in time would inherit their property. When the parents declined the offer, Fitzgerald offered to take the whole family to Minnesota. The Irish Press reported in 1951 that, on the wall of the cottage where he was born hangs a big framed picture of New York. Asked in 1951 what would become of him, Garrod replied, "Ragad go America. I will go to America." When the islands were finally abandoned by their dwindling population in November 1953, there were reasons to fear what their fate might portend for the wider project of Irish independence. 30 years earlier, after a decade of turbulence and violence, The Irish Free State had emerged in 26 of the island's 32 counties. The other 6 northeastern counties formed into the new entity of Northern Ireland, dominated by its Protestant majority and still part of the United Kingdom. In 1948, when Garrod became famous, the Free State officially declared itself a republic and cut its last formal ties with Britain. It was unquestionably now a sovereign state, with its destiny in its own hands. It was ruled by 2 virtually identical nationalist political parties that emerged from the Civil War of 1923, Fine Gael and, by far the most successful, the Fianna Fáil party of De Valera, last surviving commandant of the Easter Rising of 1916 that ignited the revolutionary movement. Both parties were fervently Catholic, deeply respectful of the right of the church hierarchy to make binding rulings on all questions of morality, especially those relating to reproduction and sexuality. Both claimed as a priority the revival of the Irish language as the vernacular of the people, and both equally did nothing to stop the death of Irish-speaking communities like that on the Blaskets. Both saw the Irish economy as essentially agrarian and Irish society as properly rural. Both insisted that partition was a great sin and that the lost 6 counties must be restored to make Ireland whole again. Neither did very much thinking about how this might happen. This apparent unanimity of purpose concealed, however, a much deeper contradiction. The state was supposed to be autonomous and sharply defined, and the longer it was established, the more so it ought to have become. In truth, it felt ever more powerless and increasingly blurry. Ireland remained neutral in the Second World War and emerged into the world of the post-war boom as a backwater and an irrelevance. Its economic backwardness meant that it could not contain itself. Its people, like those of the Blaskets, were leaving for the very thing a holy and romantic Ireland could not provide: ordinary urban industrial modernity. Given a choice between being the last of the Mohicans or living in Indian Orchard, Springfield, they were voting with their feet. In 1959, the year after I was born, and the first year of a radical programme to try to save Ireland by modernising its economy, the British astronomer Fred Hoyle published Ossian's Ride. The novel is a strange mixture of science fiction and John Buchan-style adventure story. In it is now 1970. The narrator, Thomas Sherwood, a young English mathematician, is summoned by British intelligence and sent on a mission to penetrate the headquarters of ICE, the Industrial Corporation of ERA, a fictionalized version of the actual IDA, the Industrial Development Authority, which was given the task of attracting foreign investment to Ireland. The nature of ICE is explained to Sherwood. ICE came into being some 12 years ago. A small group of very able scientists approached the government of ERA with what seemed an entirely straightforward proposition. The proposal was to establish an industry for the extraction of a range of chemicals from the organic material in peat, turf, as the Irish call it. Within a short time, ICE was producing an amazing range of valuable chemicals, ostensibly from turf as raw material, although whether this was really so is open to doubt. ICE, like the companies attracted by the real IDA, had been given a 10-year tax holiday by the Irish government. After its 4th year, however, it makes an immensely profitable breakthrough. It invents a contraceptive pill, which it apparently manufactures from turf. After this, ICE switches from chemistry to physics, and Ireland becomes an industrial and potentially a military superpower. The old world powers need to know what is going on, and Sherwood is sent as a spy. When he asks why the Catholic Church didn't stop the creation of the pill, his handler replies, "Ridicule, my boy. If I may parody the poet Schiller, against laughter even the hierarchy fights in vain." Think of it. Contraceptives from turf. For decades the Church has fulminated against their use, while all the time outside every cottage there'd be piled a whole mountain of the stuff. Sherwood, on his trip to the future Ireland, sees, in Dublin, a city that is being systematically demolished and rebuilt. He witnesses the arrival of television and summarises remarkably well the impact that it would actually have in Ireland a few years after Hoyle's book was published. It seemed as if two different worlds had come into sharp conflict. Sherwood discovers that ice has sealed off the southwest corner of Ireland, Kerry, West Cork and Limerick, as its own territory. It's holy of holies, the inner sanctum where the head scientists are based and from which they have organised their futuristic enterprise to make Ireland the centre of the modern world, is the Blasket Island of Inishvikalon. In 1959, when Hoyle was writing his Fantasia, it was uninhabited, but later it was occupied as a holiday home by Charles Haughey, the corrupt Taoiseach of the 1980s and early 1990s, who saw himself as the great leader of Irish industrial modernity and father of the Celtic tiger boom that followed him. The architects of ice are, of course, aliens. Having taken human form, they came to the Blasket Islands from a distant imploding planet, bringing with them the knowledge accumulated by their vastly more advanced civilization. For Hoyle's original British readers, there may have been a certain reassurance in knowing that the charming Irish scatterbrains Sherwood encounters couldn't really work out all that complicated mathematics and technology on their own. Yet here too was a metaphorical ring of truth. The transformation of Ireland over the last 60 years has sometimes felt as if a new world had landed from outer space on top of an old one. In 2004, the release of State Papers from 1973 revealed that in that year an American rocket scientist, Gary Hudson, approached the Irish consul in Chicago with a detailed plan to build a space station on another of the Blaskets, Inishbrow. He intended to use it for the launching of a commercial space shuttle. He claimed to represent a group of scientists and investors, including an astronaut who walked on the moon, and British astronomer Sir Frederick Hoyle. Civil servants in Dublin dismissed the idea as possibly a gigantic leg pull. In fact, Hudson was a genuine pioneer in commercial spaceflight, and by the time his proposal was revealed in 2004, stranger things had happened in Ireland. Chapter 1. 1958. On Noah's Ark. My parents' wedding photographs always remind me of a frontier town in an old western. To prise open the mock mother-of-pearl covers of the wedding album is to enter a world of strange contrasts. There they are, elegant and radiant, wrapped in the proud formality of the 1950s, my mother's elaborate white dress and veil, the clean lines of my father's bespoke suit. They are emblems of a great continuity, of a seriousness and respectability forged over generations of struggle against squalor and despair, against poverty and violence. Their adamant dignity sparkles like a diamond hard-won from the dirt. What gives the pictures their air of high noon, though, of a respectable wedding threatened by the dangers of a frontier town, is the setting. The Catholic church that forms the background to the photographs should be dark with Gothic curves or bright with Baroque tracery, but is merely dull with the blank stare of unadorned concrete blocks. It is not really a chapel at all, but a temporary shed slapped up to serve a raw new suburb while the proper church is being built. It may have been consecrated by the wave of a bishop's hand, but it is unconsecrated by those holier things, by the skill of craftsmen, or by the hopes and aspirations, the dreads and supplications of dead generations. The place looks like what it is, transitional. It has been there for 11 years, a dreary substitute for the real thing, which was being built up the road at enormous cost, with seating for 1,700 worshippers at a time. There is no history here. Some kind of displacement is happening, but no new place has yet come into being. It is not just that those rough walls look unfinished, it is that they will never be finished. They merely await their inevitable demolition. Just as they have no past, they are not intended to have a future. They make my parents seem like settlers in an unmapped territory, their wedding staking a claim in land for which there are as yet no title deeds. And yet the strange thing about them is that they were not emigrants, merely colonists in a new kind of Irish landscape. The temporary church was a few minutes' walk from the house on Auchavana Road, into which my mother had moved with her family 7 years previously in 1948. It was part of the Crumlin housing estate, a big web of narrow roads, lined by largely identical two-storey working-class dwellings, spun out of the countryside southwest of Dublin City. They were not planning to live there at first, but they were also not planning to live in the place to which so many Irish people of their age were looking. Elsewhere. Abroad. Away. In September 1957, when my mother was 4 months pregnant with me, the satirical magazine Dublin Opinion ran a cartoon on its cover. A young woman identified as Ireland is speaking urgently to a fortune-teller. "Get to work. They're saying I've no future." The future, as it might be lived out on the island, seemed to very many people a void, a nullity. Yet my father at 25 and my mother at 27 planted a foot in it by getting married. They must have been able to look into that fortune-teller's crystal ball and see something worthwhile. Or maybe, as I always suspected, my mother saw it, and my father, who couldn't quite believe that she was marrying him, just saw her. My father had a job as a bus conductor, taking fares and keeping order on his routes from the southern suburbs into Dublin City. He had a dark blue uniform and a cap with an oddly boat-shaped badge in regal purple trimmed with silver that said CIE, Chorus Umper Éireann, which meant Irish Transport System in the indigenous language he did not speak, and that Irish governments had been trying without success to revive as the vernacular for 30 years. But before he met my mother, he had filled out the papers for emigration to Canada. He had cousins there. Most of his brothers and sisters were in England. My mother, who worked in the Player Wills cigarette factory half a mile away from Auchavana Road, didn't want to leave. Except for a sister who was a nun in India and her youngest brother, who settled in Manchester, her family tended to stay in Ireland. So, she and my father did not emigrate. They got married. And both of these things, in the Ireland of the mid-1950s, were unusual. A few years later, my father wrote down the addresses of his siblings. Eileen and Paddy were in Dublin. The rest were Kevin, Bicknor Road, Maidstone, Kent, England. Rita, Ruddington Way, Newtown, Birmingham, England. Jean, somewhere in London. Seamus, Ossington Buildings, Meskin Street, London, England. Mary, somewhere in Australia. Carmel, Glenthorne Street, Hammersmith, London, England. He added the first cousin to whom he had been very close, Vincent, Fircroft College, Selly Oak, Birmingham, England. As for marriage, it was more unusual in Ireland than anywhere else in the world. Ireland was one of the most Catholic countries on earth, and the church preached that the family based on marriage between a man and a woman was a sacred thing, an earthly reflection of the Holy Family. But in reality, Ireland had a shockingly low marriage rate. Statisticians could not find a comparable country. It also had Europe's lowest proportion of women in the population, because women got out in even larger numbers than men did. Census figures published 2 years before my parents' wedding showed that the percentages unmarried of all age groups were still the highest in the world. This was just about beginning to change. On the day before my parents' wedding, the front page of the Irish Times carried the headline, "Slight increase in marriage rates." The rate had risen from 7.4 per 1,000 people to 7.5. It was not the kind of statistical blip most people noticed. The mood was too bleak. Dublin Opinion had created a visual image of it on its cover in July 1956. The island with nothing on it except a sign saying, "Shortly available. undeveloped country, unrivaled opportunities, magnificent views, political and otherwise, owners going abroad. One of those most struck by it was the recently appointed Secretary of the Department of Finance, T.K. Whittaker, who began work on a document that would shape my life. He later recalled, "As far as I remember, the immediate stimulus was seeing a cover of Dublin Opinion. The image may have been powerful enough to have momentous effects, but it was wrong in one respect. It was not the owners who were going abroad. Ireland was owned very securely and very comfortably by a post-revolutionary political elite, by a well-heeled professional class, by big cattle ranchers, and above all by the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. The state, founded in revolution and civil war, had become remarkably stable. But it was a stability sustained by radical instability. To keep it as it was, huge parts of the population had to emigrate, for otherwise the sheer weight of their discontented numbers would drag it down. This created a surreal disjunction. Ireland, as a notion, was almost suffocatingly coherent and fixed, Catholic, nationalist, rural. This was the Platonic form of the place. But Ireland as a lived experience was incoherent and unfixed. The first Ireland was bounded, protected, shielded from the unsavoury influence of the outside world. The second was unbounded, shifting, physically on the move to that outside world. In the space between these two Irelands there was a haunted emptiness, a sense of something so unreal that it might disappear completely. I was born on Sunday the 16th of February 1958. 3 events of that weekend can serve as portholes into this strangeness. 2 days before I arrived, the committee of the Dublin Theatre Festival, which was due to be staged in May, decided to drop Bloomsday, a planned adaptation of James Joyce's Ulysses, from its programme. The board, it is understood, felt that recent adverse publicity, which had followed the expression of disapproval by the Most Reverend Dr. McQuaid, Archbishop of Dublin, made the production of Bloomsday inadvisable. McQuaid, one of the most powerful figures in Ireland, had made his displeasure known by refusing a request from the organisers to have the opening of the festival marked by the celebration of a special votive mass. The author of the adaptation, Alan MacLelland, was particularly disappointed because I had the play vetted by an authority on moral dogma, and I was advised on any blasphemous passages, which I naturally agreed to cut. Hilton Edwards, who had been due to direct the staging at the Gate Theatre, said that he was not surprised because, as always, there has been a rigid censorship of plays, as of everything else. He accepted the decision with resignation. "All right, I am no rebel. If the people of this city think it is not for them, I am not upset." He added that the festival would now end up in the kind of silly joke for the rest of the world that most things have that happened here. Everyone will feel very smug and very pure here, and they will be wrong, as usual. Sean O'Casey, whose new play The Drums of Father Ned had also been dropped because he refused to make alterations, had a similar response. The dropping of the plays will be a subject of ridicule all over the world. O'Casey subsequently banned the production of all his plays in Ireland during his lifetime. Over the weekend, Samuel Beckett withdrew 3 mime plays and a reading of his radio play All That Fall from the festival in protest at the Archbishop's interventions against O'Casey and Joyce. Within a few days, the entire festival would be postponed, in effect, abandoned. There was, though, one deliciously farcical little afterpiece. It emerged that the Lord Mayor of Dublin had been advised by his Catholic chaplain that there was nothing objectionable about staging Ulysses, since it was a story known to everybody. This was taken to suggest that there might, after all, be some little tinge of liberalism within the church. But it didn't become clear until much later that he was confusing Homer's Ulysses with that of James Joyce. While my mother was in labour, 5 or 6 masked men from the clandestine Irish Republican Army,
IRA, that claimed descent from the rebels of 1916, raided a British Army training camp in Blandford, Dorset, brandishing revolvers. They shot the sentry in the stomach and bound and gagged 10 young soldiers, all of them raw conscripts, in the guardroom. It was very easy. The guards' rifles were not loaded. But the men then drove off in a rented Hillman Hunter without taking any weapons or doing any damage. One of the raiders muttered to a soldier he was tying up, "This is with the compliments of the IRA." Another was strangely dressed in an army greatcoat and blue trousers, with a red stripe down the seam, like part of an archaic dress uniform from an earlier time, as if he were playing a soldier in an old melodrama. The raid would be treated with great jollity when it was discussed in the House of Commons a few days later, with the veteran Labour politician Manny Shinwell teasing the newly appointed Secretary of State for War, Christopher Soames, amid general laughter, that this was the first battle in which he has been engaged, and asking, "Do you regard this as a success for the War Office?" But it had a haunting coda. The next day, some of his fellow soldiers at the Blandford camp teased Corporal William Courtney. "You're Irish. Better give yourself up." Courtney, who was 51 and a trainer with the Corps of Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, was from the Moy in County Tyrone. A few minutes later, Courtney was walking past his company's office when he dropped stone dead. An officer remarked that perhaps the excitement of the previous day affected him. There was just one person involved in the raid whose identity was known, and who could, apparently, make sense of the event. A soldier at the camp, Corporal Frank Skews, mysteriously disappeared the night before the raid. Police launched a large-scale hunt for Skews, and described him in breathlessly admiring terms as a handsome man with a smart military bearing, a pleasant manner, a very clear voice, and athletic physique. They made him sound like the hero of an action movie. He was found 3 months later, however, not in England, but in Ireland, and not as Frank Skews. He had been imprisoned for the unlawful possession of arms and for refusing to account for his movements, but under a different identity, that of an Irishman, Paul Murphy. As the Irish newspapers would report in May, red-haired, 6-foot-tall British Army Corporal Frank Skews, wanted by police in England since the raid on the army camp at Blandford, Dorset, last February, has been located in the most unlikely of places, as a political prisoner in Mountjoy Jail in Dublin. Skews's double identity came to light when he became involved in a confrontation with prison warders while an attempt at a mass breakout by IRA prisoners was underway. While he was being forced to his cell, he began shouting, displaying traces of an English accent. When calm had settled once again within the prison walls, the warders reported what they had heard. Inquiries were made by the authorities, thus solving the mystery of the whereabouts and the history of the man. Yet in the descriptions of Skews issued by the English police after the Blandford raid, it was made clear that he speaks with a Cork accent. The story made no sense. Was Skews really Murphy, or Murphy really Skews? And which accent, the English one or the Irish one, betrayed his real self? Intriguingly, when an attempt was made to spring Skews Murphy from St. Bricken's military hospital in May, the IRA denied having any part in it, and alleged that, if such an attempt was in fact made, it was the work of British secret agents. But the mystery added to the surreal feeling of the event, the sense of an old history replaying itself as performance. Skews later revealed that he had escaped from England by disguising himself in a conservative suit with a copy of the Financial Times sticking out of his pocket. Perhaps a theatre festival was not necessary after all. While I was being born, the Irish government's leading moderniser, the Minister for Industry and Commerce, Sean Lemass, left Dublin Airport for Paris to take part in 2 days of discussions about whether Ireland would or could join a proposed European Free Trade Area, EFTA. The previous year, The Treaty of Rome, signed by 6 countries, Germany, France, Italy, Holland.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?